Welcome to another happy Wake For Me video. In this episode, we finally get to start assembling the new tanks. What you see here is me and my welder buddy have taken the template that we created and cut all the pieces apart. We had it taped together and transferred it to cardboard. We put the cardboard on the sheet of aluminum and then traced it out like this. Now, in order to get the corners square and the lines straight, we didn't trace it directly. We marked where the edges and corners were and then used a square, that big long yellow square, to actually mark out the lines that we're going to cut. The process was kind of long and tedious, but fairly straightforward. We arranged the cardboard on the sheet of aluminum to maximize the use of the metal, and then we marked it out and prepared to cut. For those of you wondering, the blue color of that aluminum sheet is actually plastic. They put plastic on aluminum sheets to prevent oxidization, which is just a sort of a mild form of corrosion. The oxidization looks like white powder or dust, and that blue coating prevents that. I mean, they have no idea how long the sheet will be sitting in a warehouse. So here we are making our first cut. It's kind of nerve-wracking. That sheet of aluminum cost me about $160. It's 3/16 of an inch thick, and it is 50/50 alloy. The aluminum that would be suitable for a marine environment. The saw that we're using is just a Makita skill saw, but it has on it a blade specially designed for cutting aluminum, and it did an absolutely fabulous job. This clip is obviously in fast motion, but cutting through that metal was just about as fast as cutting through wood. It was really sweet, and it did a great job. The downside of it is the chips. If you look under my feet in this shot here, you can see all the aluminum dust or chips that's piling up on the floor. And simply by walking across it or standing in it like we're doing there, it is sharp and it sticks to the soles of your shoes. So you end up with aluminum dust, sawdust everywhere. I'm still finding bits of aluminum dust at home in my vehicle and in clothing, like in my pockets and what have you. You can see in this clip that I'm holding a handheld LED light because it's evening time when we're doing this, and although it's got bright lights in the shop, that little bit of extra light makes it easier to see the lines on the plastic for cutting purposes, and it worked quite well. Now we're beginning to assemble the tank. In a previous video, when I was talking about the template, I was saying how it's such an odd shape, and the template material was taken off of the old tanks which were tacked back together. And I mentioned that that process led to problems, and it did. Boy, did it ever. And you can see us right now trying to sort out what some of those problems were. The angles between the back pane and the front pane and the side panes were just a royal pain. So when we tacked it together, we didn't weld the entire seam. We just put tacks intermittently so as to be able to square the pieces up with each other, and that worked well enough. So you can see my friend is just hitting the ends, which is just enough to hold it in place, and then move it as we need to. So there's the back piece going on. You can see that it's a little bit too big, and that's because of the piece that we cut out across the top. So the relationship between this end piece and the back piece was not quite correct. The angle was wrong, so we had to trim off probably about 1/8 of an inch in order to get the angles to line up properly. It wasn't a big deal, but it meant redoing the welding. So at this point we have to cut off the extra piece that extends over the end. Get that aluminum sawdust out of the way. And there's the top ready to be tacked into place. It's surprising how strong the tank becomes with just a few tack welds here and there. We ended up heaving that thing around and moving it around and flipping it over with just tack welds in place, and it didn't come undone or bend or anything. It was kind of impressive, at least it was to me. So this piece is the bottom of the tank. Once you start cutting the pattern on one end, you have to cut a lot of other pieces to make them match, because you don't just change one side and then everything else just fits. Everything else has to be adjusted in relationship to it. So this is the bottom of the tank that we're cutting right now. I have to file off the burrs because the saw does leave a few burrs on the metal. Tack that in place. And there's only 2 pieces left. In this case, we're only going to weld in one last piece. And the reason for that is because we need a little bit of an open space in which to put the baffle. There's going to be a baffle in the inside of the tank, so we didn't want to cut the baffle first because we wouldn't know what the angles were. As you can see here, the angle, this part here was really quite frustrating because the angles between the front and the back are parallel, but then that main angle there, you can actually see it in this shot, is way off. It was off by maybe 3/8 of an inch, half an inch. So we actually had to put the tank on the floor and then cut it in situ like that. But it worked out. It was a little bit of a challenge, but we got it done and it worked very satisfactorily. There, now you can see the tank is actually sitting reasonably square, and to trim just a little bit. And now it's sitting flat. So at this point we can trace out the last piece of metal that we're going to cut, which will create the front plate, and then we'll get that tacked in place. One more minor adjustment. And then remark it. Now, for those who are curious, the reason why we didn't put the tank on the edge and use the square edge is because the tank is not square. There isn't a side on that thing that's square with another side. I mean, if you look at it, it's all triangles and rhombuses and all kinds of weird shapes. And just like that, the plastic gets peeled off. Now the trouble with this particular piece is that because it's not a square piece or a rectangle piece, it's just an odd shaped piece, there's only one way it can go on. So trying to figure out which way that one way is was kind of a bit of a hassle. Of course, I edited this to make it a little funnier, but it was kind of funny. Alright, just weld the thing already. Oh, need to trim that sucker. Fortunately, my friend Ken is a perfectionist, and if it's not exactly perfect, he goes back to the drawing board and gets trimmed or shaved or whatever it needs. And there it is, tacked in place, which leaves just that one little piece open into which we can put the baffle.